Welcome, everybody. I'm happy that you are all here for our conversation on deterrence. I can say it will be very interesting. My name is Dirk Zimper, and I will be the moderator for today. And before we are directly jumping into the topic of deterrence, I would like to introduce our distinguished panel that we have here. We have with us Mr. Angus Lapsley. He's NATO Assistant Secretary General for Defense Policy and Planning. Welcome. I think this deserves an applause. This is already for the performance that we are going to see. So, and then we have with us General Badia. He's the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander, Transformation. And again. And then we have with us General Laubenthal. He's the Chief of Staff of the Supreme Headquarter Allied Power Europe. Welcome. Thank you very much. And before I'm going to ask the first question, what I did somehow as a preparation for this panel, I was looking how often we have the word deterrence or deter within the current Munich Security Report. So, and it's overall 14 times mentioned within that report. So you could think, is it enough? Maybe, because it's a very political report, right? And all what is written in is somehow something that we need to address right now. So, but we can discuss today if it is enough, and it should be more. So, and I would like to give a first question, because we hear the word deterrence many times, but I think it is good to start with a definition, so that we start from the base. So my question would be, what is deterrence from your perspective, and what are the fundamentals of deterrence? And I would give the question first to you, Mr. Lapsley.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to start with the philosophy of this. Well, look, I'd say the first thing I'd say about deterrence from the perspective of NATO is it's what we are all about. NATO's goal for the last 75 years has been to prevent a conflict happening and prevent an attack on our members. And actually, we've been incredibly successful at that. Now, we know that in order to deter, you sometimes have to demonstrate your ability to defend and to fight. But fundamentally, deterrence is what we are all about as an alliance. And I think we've had to rediscover that over the last few years, as we have rediscovered the fact that we are now once again facing a determined, aggressive, risk-taking adversary who is in many ways a peer and can really threaten us. I think the essentials of deterrence for me, I mean, we normally talk about 3 Cs. We talk about credibility, communication, and capability, because essentially deterrence is about influencing the mind of your adversary, making them feel that whatever they want to do to you, today is not the day to do it. Or actually the cost to them of trying something would be disproportionately high, and it's not worth it. So fundamentally, deterrence is about influencing the way somebody else thinks about you. To do that, you have to have the credibility that you would act. You would cause them pain. You would stop them, whether it's deterrence by punishment or by denial. You need to demonstrate that you have the capability to do that, not just the will. And lastly, you have to communicate all of that, hence the 3 Cs. And that's why, actually, we talk about deterrence so much in NATO now, because actually, if you don't talk about it, you're not having the effect on the other side that you would want. The last thing I would say is to misquote and garble Clausewitz, which is a dangerous thing to do alongside 2 German generals. I think he said that the nature of war doesn't change, but its character does. And I think the nature of deterrence doesn't change. It's the 3 Cs I've just talked about. But what definitely does change is its character. And I think what we're going through as an alliance at the moment is a process of trying to understand what the character of today's deterrence challenge is like, which means understanding the nature of our main adversary, Russia, which is not the Russia we knew in the Cold War, certainly not the Russia we had in the post-Cold War period. But it also means understanding ourselves and what our capabilities are, what we are really prepared to do, etc. So yeah, I will end on that Clausewitzian note and then be corrected by the Germans on the panel.
Please,
take it over. First of all, hello to everyone. Angus, how could I correct you? I mean, sorry, but, you know, never ever. What I would like to start with first is deterrence by mutual support and full common understanding, as you see us sitting here. Why do I say this, ladies and gentlemen? Because I'm in the business for a long time, and it was always one of my real goals, aligning policy, defense planning, and operations a lot closer as I saw it from a national point of view. And this is really something what we achieved, and this is what you see nowadays, and we will come throughout the discussion to that. So that's just a remark. This is also deterrence, that you are really aligned in certain things. And from what Angus just said, from the philosophy part, from a defense planning part, of course, we always look what's the mandate that's politically given, which sits right to me through the nations. And of course, for us, the most important thing is, as we go back to the Madrid summit, where the heads of states agreed, our main mission again is deterrence and defense. And I cannot stress it enough. We need to have a greater and a real focus on the deterrence part first, because if you have to defend, and it really comes to defending, a lot of things have gone wrong, because then you fail in deterring. And this is the mandate we're taking also from the defense planning side of the house. And if you reflect, you might see from the former thinking, and I'm still from that age, if you will, when we were discussing deterrence in the former days, everybody jumped very quickly into nuclear. And that's also the character. It has changed, I think, because deterrence and escalation dynamics, you should not, and definitely we cannot take any option off the table. You have to have all the options on the table. And this is where the way we see defense planning now when it comes to deterrence, what is the broad array of options we are having? And this is, and we will come to that when we talk capabilities, where we go on a broader array in the conventional arena. When we talk offense versus defense, because this all goes into deterrence as we see it, and this is the common plan as we go forward. And this is really this character of deterrence has changed dramatically to the better, I think, because you have a lot more options nowadays.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation and taking Angus and Chris' points and translate it on the military strategic level. I would firstly state that our philosophy and strategy is guided very much by the principle that no adversary, no country, no state or non-state actor achieve an advantage over NATO. And that all NATO nations do it together. No NATO nation is addressing these problems alone. So we are standing together. And to give some operational examples, I would mention the air policing along the eastern flank. From Iceland with Finnish F-35, with F-18 in the moment, which I will visit in the next 2 days, French Rafale in Lithuania, the air defense units in Poland and Romania. The Baltic Sentry operation started on 25th of December, rocket speed, 36 hours of planning. Within 5 days, the first vessels gathered in the Baltic Sea, and then since then continuing the operation. It's a presence and surveillance mission to protect critical underwater infrastructure and international seaways, and get a better surveillance and better picture, situation awareness of what's going on there, and maybe catch somebody by surprise or even in the activity against such infrastructure and gain enough evidence to prosecute it. I think this kind of deterrence is what I meant. We are going to the land sector. So you all are familiar probably with the forward land forces. We now expand them from battle group level to brigade level, so 8 brigades along the eastern flank. All these initiatives are underlined by, I think, the most sophisticated framework of plans, which also inform now capability planning. And this is the linkage we are now increasing. All the capability planning is not just out of the blue or wishful thinking from the nations. It's plans informed, because we need the capabilities exactly in the plans. This is the proof of the pudding, so to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that was, by the way, an excellent transition to the next question that I'm going to have. Perfect. Thank you for that. And already as a preparation for the audience, this will be my last question, then I will open the floor. So you can already think about questions that you may have and want to address the panel with. So we've talked about capabilities. What future capabilities have NATO nations agreed on? And how will those, let's say, change the character of deterrence? Because it was rightly explained that the nature will be the same, but the character is changing. And I'm going to give one additional point that could be reflected on, and this is written actually within the report. I'm going to cite here. Why some Republicans warn that the cost of deterrence is considerably less than the cost of war, the US will likely shift the bulk of the burden of defending the continent onto European NATO allies, no longer considering the security, democratic stability, of prosperity of Europe's strategic priorities. So what does that all mean for Europe as being part of the alliance? I'm looking forward to your answers. Please.
So the question is, what does that changed capability picture look like as we refocus the alliance on deterrence and collective defence? I think the first place to start is that all of it is underpinned by the fact that we are a nuclear alliance, and that is extremely important, not just, I think, in terms of how we would respond to a nuclear contingency or nuclear coercion, but I think it underpins a lot of the other capability demands that flow from that, particularly for those countries who are nuclear powers, for whom a lot of their conventional capability is used in support of that deterrent. And all three of our nuclear powers are modernising their forces at the moment, putting a huge amount of investment into that. But also those countries who participate in the dual-capable aircraft mission with American weapons, they are also modernising their capabilities and their infrastructure, etc. So it's just always worth remembering that that is the foundation of deterrence for the alliance. I think when you come to conventional capabilities, what we're essentially saying to allies is you just have to understand what a profound shift it is to move from the capabilities that you need for periodic, perhaps enduring expeditionary operations and the capabilities that you need for an Article 5 contingency, for warfighting at home, very high intensity, potentially at large scale, potentially for a long period, against a nuclear-armed peer opponent. And I'll let Markus and Chris can describe what that capability demand signal looks like area by area, but it has to be multi-domain. We have to be able to compete across all domains. The scale goes up, and in very, very crude terms, the scale goes up by about a third from what we have been previously targeting allies for. I mean, last point on the US. Both the US forces here in Europe and also, in many ways, as importantly, the forces that the US is committed to bringing to Europe in a crisis, they are a really important part of the mix. We had very clear reassurance from Secretary Hegseth when he was in Brussels earlier this week that America is committed to that role in terms of its contribution into the plans and how we fight. But what is also true is that the balance between the American bit of the force and the European-Canadian bit of the force is going to have to change. That is already baked into the NDPP process that we run, and that's something I think we've understood for a long time now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, picking up where Angus just stopped. Number one is, as we go forward, and what Markus said is, as we discussed what deterrence in theory overall is and what we just heard on capabilities, now we have the very positive change as well as, so we are not only threat informed, we are plans informed, as just said. And from that, now from a defense planner's view, as we plan for 32 nations, what are the capabilities required, as we call them, the minimum capabilities requirement as we go forward in order to be able to deter? There is, number one, from the overall philosophy where we are going in order to deter, it's the dominance. I need to have within NATO complete information dominance in order to then really have a decision dominance. And from the decision dominance, then you have the escalation or engagement dominance. And be it lethal, non-lethal, that doesn't matter. But if you don't have the information and if you cannot make the right decisions, then it's pretty hard really to deter up front already. How do we do that? And this is, if you will, what we are thinking of, what is NATO's strategy of success in order to do that? And this is what we just heard. This is, we have this multi-domain idea and this multi-domain approach, and nations agreed to that. What's I wouldn't say new, but what's really extra to it, because everybody is very familiar with those three classic domains, air, land, and sea. But there are two more, and they are very, very important because they enable, if you will. And this is space, and this is cyber. And now you go, if you take those 5 domains, and this is so important because with those 5 domains, you have to have a digital backbone. You have to be digitally enabled to be in the information dominance and then take the right decisions. So there you see, this is the strategy which we are following, which the nations agreed to. And now it comes, because now from there, in order to deter also in the conventional arena, from there, now you go into new capabilities. What are the challenges? Well, there are a lot of challenges out there. And that's what Angus already said, because as you can imagine, there are some gaps from previous planning cycles. Nations have to fulfill them. And then you have an extra, Angus just said, it's about 30%. And then there's even another extra, and that's what Markus already said, is because we are in higher readiness. And when you put your forces on higher readiness, then you automatically need more money in order to do that. Why do I say that? Because there are another 3 C's, besides the 3 C's we have on deterrence, is cash, contribution, and capabilities, which makes NATO again. So this is really, and you might want to ask this question, and we can go more detailed in that one. It's pretty easy to explain why it's 3% and more, where we are going right now. Because what we just explained, and what you see from the defense planning point of view, where we're going, well, it's not, I'm often getting asked, well, it's not only the money. Definitely it's not only the money, but you need to showcase something. And it's definitely those 3% in order to get the right capabilities, and then you can go with the right contributions. Just, I give you a glance on just 2 sectors where we need, as nations, where we need to invest more. It's the discussion of offense and defense. On one hand, it's integrated air and missile defense. And this is what we said this morning. This is what we say to nations so often right now. Buy, you cannot invest wrong. Because this is, if you have strong defense, as we know, this is deterring in itself. But at the same time, as NATO is a defensive alliance in itself, this does not mean that we will not act offensive. Because sometimes that's a bit mistaken by people. So we have to have all those offensive capabilities at the same time. And this is also the character of deterrence, if you have to create the greatest dilemma to your opponent you can create. And now imagine if you have capabilities that go 3,000 kilometers plus in enemy territory. Besides all the other capabilities you have, this is something, and coming out of all the different domains, that makes your opponent think if he really wants to take us on.
Thank you.
I will pick up the readiness aspect, so what Allied Command Operations is doing day by day. And you will not have a single day where there is no NATO fighter in the air, no NATO ship at sea, or no land forces somewhere employed for vigilance activities or for an exercise. So we are generating and building readiness of capabilities and forces and employing them into geography, into the area of responsibility given to the Supreme Allied Commander, Europe. What we need to do is employ today. So the task given to us is not something theoretical which starts in a 5 years' time when we have maybe sufficient capabilities built up already. So we need to be able to fight tonight, which is our short-term view about the next 5 years. and then we have requirements deriving from the plans informing capability development. And then I look to my colleagues and state my requests and hope within approximately 15 years I will get these capabilities and can employ them into our plans as well. So this is very practical, mechanical planning. And looking into the capabilities, air defense is definitely one what is missing. And this all comes from a different main effort from the last 25 years where we employed forces, not heavy, not in the requirement status as we need them now along the eastern flank or 360 degrees. They had a complete different mission and a complete different set of capabilities and technologies. This is changing now, but I need the forces which are committed from the nations to us tonight to fight with. But I can design the force I really need by capability planning with my colleagues together in Brussels and Norfolk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Can I make just one quick addition to that? Because, and we might want to discuss that. As we, on our command level, as I said, we very much look into what's the mandate given by politics. And you can see, and I just would like to remind everyone from the Washington summit, one statement is in there, as they agreed on deterrence and defense, they agreed at the same time we need to have completely resilient societies, which is much more than just the military, so a whole of state approach. And with that, you need to have an absolutely state-of-the-art industrial base with that. Otherwise, you cannot fulfill that.
Thank you very much. I think I will ask a quick question, something that popped into my mind. We have alluded on deterrence by punishment and deterrence by denial. And we understand that both elements are obviously important. However, let's make an experiment right now. You have to choose for one option. What would it be? Quick and why? General, would you like to start? If you have to.
Well, you choose deterrence by denial if you can. That's what you go for. And in order to do so, from the defense planning as I see it, we need to invest, as we invest into the defensive side, we need to invest a lot more into the offensive side. Because this is, you have to show strengths. That's the only language Russia understands.
If denial works, you don't need a punishment. But make no mistake, if you are not able to punish, it's not credible. And then I'll be with Angus again. So I think it's all about credibility. The other believes we can and we will.
So this is a debate NATO's had since the late 1940s. And when in the very first 2 years of NATO, certainly the Americans and the British sort of felt, well, it's a promise that we will come and sort things out if necessary, the promise of punishment. And actually what we realized quite quickly, and in fact it was France that pushed this very hard at the time, was no, you actually have to be able to demonstrate to the Russians, we will stop you. And we've had the balance between that in the alliance ever since, and I think it remains the case. If you don't get your conventional defense right, which is deterrence by denial, it is much more likely that you will be tested on your deterrence by punishment.
Thank you very much. So now I open the floor. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please, General. The icebreaker, thank you. Much appreciated.
Well, you were looking at me, so...
No choice, huh?
No choice. I had a question, but basically Chris Badia touched it already in one of his last statements, because the whole panel was going very much about the conventional part of deterrence. And it's much more. It's whole of society, and we had a good discussion this morning during breakfast where Doug Bear was talking about cyber hybrid attack, disinformation. And, if the adversary is clever, he stays below the level of war, of course, and tries to break society, to weaken society with cyber attack, hybrid attack, disinformation. So the question is, how do we deter on that level? That's, I think, one very important issue to keep in mind. Thank you very much.
Who wants to tackle that question?
I can go first if you want. And Thorsten, you're absolutely right in what you just said. I would make the statement, the overall deterrence of NATO works Why? Because we see the most of the, if I may say so, attacks and activities on the hybrid level. And this is, but don't be mistaken, it is as serious, but everybody tries to stay below the threshold of armed conflict. And of course, we, at the same time, when we talk conventional, when we talk all those things, because that's another task we are seeing, and this is what the strategy you should follow. At the same time, you need to stay below the threshold of nuclear. So you have the conventional part, but as we see it right now, and this is what we see daily, everything is in the hybrid arena. And the way I explain it all the time, because hybrid is sometimes a bit blurred, and we in NATO, and NATO Secretary General, he told everyone within the organization, explain it better. And you can define it via space, via cyber. If you go critical undersea infrastructure, if you see how migrants are being used, and then if you have the complete picture, and when you see all the parts of hybrid, then you see that at the end it's a very holistic approach, again, from the opponent as they go forward, testing the alliance at the same time. And this is really also something below the threshold of armed conflicts, where we, within NATO, and also from a defense planning aspect, where we go into, especially, and I come back to what I said, in the cyber and space arena and all those things, how do you deter? How do you make that happen? Well, it always starts, you have to write the right situational awareness. So this is something NATO really now gets a lot closer to in really understanding on the hybrid side what it is. And from there, of course, then you need to consult, you need to shame and blame, and then you go in all the measures you have, and it doesn't definitely not start with an armed conflict. It starts where you have sanctions and all those things ongoing. But first of all, you need to understand that, and this is also where the deterrence goes.
Yeah, I mean, three things. One, we're having a debate in NATO at the moment about whether to stop talking about hybrid and actually just start talking about Russia's destabilization campaign, because that is effectively what we are seeing, and maybe we should, hybrid sounds vaguely reassuring. What we're seeing is a destabilization campaign against Europe and North America. Secondly, I think one of the traps you can fall into here is thinking that this is all sequential, that you have a destabilization or a hybrid phase, then you have a conventional phase, then you have a nuclear phase. I don't think that's the way the Russians think. I think they think they're playing in all three spaces simultaneously, and they will dial them up or down according to their wishes. And then thirdly, on destabilization, hybrid, what do you want, a sub-threshold, whatever you want to call it, I mean, I think there's at least three paradigms you can apply to how you deal with it. So the first is actually more of a kind of policing or counterintelligence paradigm, where you just try and identify stuff, find out who did it, try and stop them, expose it if you can. The limitation of that is the Russians just don't care, frankly, if they're exposed. But at least sometimes, your intelligence services, your police can actually stop something happening. Your second paradigm is a resilience one. You messed with that cable, but guess what? We've got three more. We'll repair it. We'll move on. That's what happens. And then the third one, which I think is the most difficult, is to ask yourself whether you can apply an actual deterrence paradigm in this area and convey to the Russians, keep doing this, you will pay a price of some sort in some form. That's the one which is hardest, not least because we act within the law. That's an important part of who we are as an alliance. We are not going to go tit for tat with Russia on the kind of things that they do. But I think it's helpful to sort of think about those. I think it's a mix of those three approaches that you probably need to apply.
Thank you.
If you look at the Baltic Sentry operation, military is very often a quick responder because we can respond. But it is a military task, sometimes or very often not. So Baltic Sentry as the protection of critical undersea infrastructure in the Baltic Sea could also be done by coast guards, could also be done by maybe civilian companies as well. So there are also technical solutions to survey and have early warnings, indicators right This is, I think, where we need to collaborate even more intense together with ACT to experiment technology, maybe within that mission or with military vessels that we then quickly can employ to free the vessels. These are warships and not doing warship missions, so that eats at the end readiness. Therefore, a stronger collaboration between the industry, between the ACT capability planners and the operators is necessary to come to quick solutions and free the ships. Maybe it is a strategic goal from Russia just to fix these capabilities because they are then not operating in the North Atlantic, not operating in the Greenland UK gap. So, and this is critical for ACO, and this is a very critical, holistic look into it. And we are always demanding a quick solution for this to free the assets because they are always scarce. And you will never find a commander or an operator who has sufficient resources. So we also have to employ limited resources in looking for alternatives to free the high-value capabilities.
Yeah, so you never have enough, right?
But just on that, I think it's a really interesting point as well, that we have to think of the perverse consequences of our reactions. So, I mean, I mentioned exposing these kind of activities, which I think is a natural reaction, but that may sometimes be what the Russians want. They want us to be talking about them the whole time. They want us to suck ships away from other tasks. So you have to try and make these calculations in quite a smart way.
Thank you. So 2 questions I saw. I think we will collect the questions and then give you answers. There was a question here, right? Yes. Their question? And then we collect 3 questions, I would say, and then go to answer them. And we would start here in the first row.
Great. Thank you. I'm Mary Serrati. I'm the author of the book Not 1 Inch, which is a history of NATO enlargement. And I was very interested to hear you say, just put very clearly, if you have to defend something, that means something has gone wrong. Deterrence has failed. I was wondering what the thinking is, if there's a consensus on why deterrence failed on February 24th, 2022.
Okay. Do you want to answer right away or collect the questions? Let's go one by one. Yeah? Okay, please, then go ahead. We now answer directly. That's what we decided. Sorry.
Well, I remember debating this in the room last year when, Mary, you were up here talking about your book. For me, it's quite clear NATO did not try and establish deterrence on Ukraine. Ukraine's not part of NATO. We've never had deterrence. Now, there was a broader political campaign to try and persuade Russia not to do what it became clear she was on the point of doing, but that is not the same as having a full-blown deterrence policy backed by military force and planning and organisation. So I really struggle with this idea that deterrence failed in Ukraine. It wasn't tried.
And if I may add to that, if I look at it, and how does deterrence work in general? It's the capabilities, it's the readiness, and now it comes, it's a political will. We can be as ready and as capable as we can. We are still working for the politicians. So if the political will, this is something you have to establish if you're ready. And another comment I just would like to make is, it was not 2022, it's 2014. And this is also from the lessons identified, also when you go back and see how conflict develops and when you should intervene and take further actions, we should always go back to 2014. I'm just giving you, there was this discussion, and I'll leave it with that. Would have a NATO training mission in Ukraine changed anything? Just think about it. Back earlier the days. Just as one thought.
Yeah, agree. Think the calculus of Russia was at that time that they can afford to do it because the US will not interfere. And there was no NATO protection because Ukraine is not NATO. But the assumption that it is a quick win within days to capture Kiev and then it's over and it's occupied failed significantly because of the preparation over decades of Partnership for Peace program where we trained, equipped and supported Ukrainian armed forces, which are brave enough with their national defense plans to stop them. And the Russian forces were in a bad shape for this kind of operation. Not trained, even not informed about it, and a complete, probably strategically miscalculation about the employment of the forces. So, and the end is known. It's today. It's still going on.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Hannah Notte with the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies based in Berlin. I want to ask a question that builds on Angus Lapsley's sort of differentiation between the levels, the hybrid, the conventional, and the nuclear. I think the notion of limited nuclear war has gained in salience again, driven by conversations in the Russian military strategic community that appear to indicate that at some point in a conflict situation, Russia might calculate that it can engage in a limited nuclear strike that will not escalate into a strategic exchange and compel war termination on favorable terms. So we could be faced in a situation where we have to go back to conventional war fighting against Russia after a limited nuclear strike. And I'm wondering whether these kinds of prospects are sort of baked in to planning for conventional war fighting, or to how it sort of informs your thinking on the conventional side.
So there's a lot in that. So I think, firstly, it's kind of easier to vaguely imply that maybe you're thinking about sub-strategic nuclear options as a war termination strategy than it is to actually do it. The costs for Russia of going down that road, the risks to Russia of going down that road are still enormous. So, I mean, it's troubling and irresponsible that's the picture they're sometimes trying to paint. But I think we can still be pretty confident of the fact that actually that is a very big threshold for them to cross and would come with huge risk to them. That said, we have to constantly look at whether our own nuclear posture is adapted and ready to deal with that kind of threat, and we do that all the time. We also have to look at our conventional posture and whether that poses enough dilemmas to force the Russians not want to go there. And I think we have to look at the interaction between the two. And this is, I'll leave this to Markus, but this is one of the planning challenges that we are going through as we kind of reinvent collective defence for this new 21st century situation and the kind of changed character that I was talking about.
In addition to that, what Angus just said, in the discussions we are having, I would characterize it, nuclear options are black and white and nothing else. It's on or it's off. And I'm not in favor of limited or tactical nuclear options. I think it leads you into wrong conclusions, because at the end of the day, it's black and white. And the consequences are dramatic, and you cannot really foresee what the consequences would be. Why do I say this? Because, and this comes back when you think that through and when you think theory of deterrence, you need to have the conventional options in the broadest way as you have, because they give you flexibility. Mm-hmm. Nuclear won't give you that. Nuclear is its last resort. That's the way I see it, we see it, and that's the way we discuss it. And by the way, because when you think all those things through, for me it's also very important that we come to a good conclusion and have a strong opinion on what it is, and that's what Angus also said. We have to show whoever it might think about it, the consequences are dramatic.
Yeah, the ability to punish includes the ability also to strike nuclear. The main effort is on conventional deterrence and defense capabilities, because we have the biggest gaps in this one because of the recent 25 years. Much investment to come in this one, but I can assure you all that even the nuclear plants are inherent part of the family of plants in ACO. So this is thought through and this is exercised annually, and so we pay the same level of attention on it. Mm-hmm. But I agree with the panel. It is not the first option, and it is an option which can nobody predict in the political reaction, but also not in the military outcome. So therefore, conventional, I think, is what we need to do to get this high payoff for credibility of our deterrence and defense.
Thank you very much for your clear words. There was a question there, and there as well, right? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Karl Heusgen. I'm representing the European machine builder industry. And I have kind of a hands-on question, probably, I guess, to General Laubenthal on conventional deterrence. What is your perspective on the performance level of European industry supplying to your needs? in the years to come. And I'm not just talking about the primes that deliver directly to you, but also the supply chain behind, the capacities of those people who supply to the primes and the capacity of those people who supply the manufacturing devices for the whole value chain. How do you analyze it? Are you aware of that value chain? And how do you make yourself heard to align and prioritize this value chain the way you would like to have it?
So we can send demand signals, which I always do, but I don't generally do this directly to the industry. So it goes via, together with my colleague from ACT, via Brussels. And I think there's a lot of discussion going on. I think this is one of SecGen's most important points, and he addressed it in every speech, in every North Atlantic Council, it will be discussed. So now, in a German uniform, as a NATO officer, with my experience in Germany, we have lost lots of capacities. And we have a highly contested market. You know the discussion about Volkswagen reducing production capacity because they have not the markets for the electric cars. Should they produce instead Boxers or Schützenpanzers or something like this? I think this is a single source of work skills. And we need to employ them either there or we need to maintain the capacity before they go elsewhere to work in other industries and maybe to expand. I think that this conversion discussion is, I think, a very fruitful one. We are too slow in production. This would close my gaps much earlier. We need to do more together, producing maybe with all production capacities in Europe, in license, whatever. I know about all the property rights and all the discussions about this as well, but we need to find solutions for this to become faster. And this is exactly what Angus mentioned in the beginning of this panel, that we need to do more as Europeans together because there is a strong demand signal, as we have heard, in the Munich Security Conference from over the Atlantic.
And in addition to that, yeah, it's no surprise Europe needs to do more. And I think since January, we all understand a lot better with more pressure that we need to do more in Europe. But having said that, I would like to come back to the Washington summit, because this resilience aspect is exactly what you just touched on as well. Europe in total needs to be more resilient, which also includes, of course, European defense industry. Mm-hmm. And this is so important that you have this basis. And I just would like to comment on that. NATO industry forums. We had 1.5 years ago when we started in Finland, in Helsinki with the first. There you could see how the industry and military and politicians really united, understood and went forward and had this new initiative. And since then, strengthening Europe, this is right now key. If you see how SecGen talks to Ursula von der Leyen, how Angus Lapsley talks on his level with his respective colleagues. So EU Commission understands, NATO understands, it comes a lot closer. And of course, what you said, supply chain management, one of the most important things, and we are fully aware of that.
I would like to leave my moderator role just for a second to answer or to bring a perspective from industry. We have increased capacities, and I would like to give one very good example how it can work in a good way. Just one example, Patriot. There was a bundle buy via NATO, NSPA. There was a substantial amount of missiles for many nations procured via NSPA. And at the end of the day, the industrial base is always a result of what is procured. And these kind of bundle buys, thinking about, okay, what more nations really need as capabilities, then we can quicker and better set up the capabilities needed and have planning and all the important stuff to have these capacities at the end of the day. Yes, please.
Just to add on this and maybe a little bit design the demand signal. For now and for years, probably in European armed forces, the gaps to close, so stocks to fill, remain significant over years, which requires higher production rates. But also not forget, the support to Ukraine will not stop. So we have a threefold demand signal to support Ukraine, to help ourselves to bring forces to the front line, and to sustain the forces for minimum 30 combat days of supply, even longer, I would say. So this is, I think, what we should not underestimate. The gaps are still there, and the production rate is not meeting these requirements. So there is really a necessity to work together closer, faster.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, I have to fear. But I would have one final question, and you can quickly answer it, okay? Now we have Christmas, and you have one wish free. What would it be if you need to benefit deterrence?
3% of GDP.
3.5 and deep precision strike.
Here we go.
North of all.
Thank you very much. It was excellent.